Fish 05. PRAK噚TI, the phenomenal universe. The material universe. According to the metaphysical schema of idealism, discussed in a certain few paragraphs of the previous chapter, the phenomenal universe, or multiverse, for those who subscribe to that hypothesis, is merely an idea, hence the term idealism, or a temporal appearance, in the conscious awareness of the universal being, either God or impersonal being, or else, that the cosmos is a temporary appearance in one's own consciousness, akin to solipsism. However, according to the school of Indian thought known as Advaita Vedanta, promulgated in this book, this metaphysical idealism is incomplete, since both subjective and objective reality is hypostatically one substantial being, or in other terms, existence awareness peace, Sachidananda, in Sanskrit, that cannot be described with human language, since it is not a thing that exists, in the strict etymological sense of the term, meaning, stand apart from, yet can easily be referred to as the ground of all being, the monad, unconditioned existence itself, pure being itself, and a host of similar monikers. See the glossary for greater elucidation. Idealism and monism are closely related theoretical concepts, and both schemas sturdily imply that the material universe is not space-time bound. Otherwise, if one were to travel to the edge of the universe, there would need to be something without the boundary of the universe, some other space, that encapsulates this universe. This contradicts the very concept of a universe, literally, turned into one. Therefore, there cannot be a so-called multiverse, for if it were so, the summation of all disjunct universes would properly be termed universe. Our observable universe would then be merely a cell, or bubble, of the totality of material nature. At what location did the universe begin to exist? The late, great Professor Dr. Alan Watts' response to the question, where is the universe located? Was nowhere and everywhere. Verse 5.1.1, from the ancient Vedic text, Brihadaranyakopanishad, an excerpt from Shukla Yajurveda, is poetically pertinent in this regard. Om Purnam Adar Purnam Idam. Purnat Purnam Udakyate. Purnasya Purnam Adaya. Purnam Avavasasyate. Om. That is complete, this is complete. From the completeness comes the completeness. If completeness is taken away from completeness, only completeness remains. An alternative translation might substitute the word complete for terms such as whole, wholeness, or fullness. That is generally interpreted as referring to Nirguna Brahman, or the unfolded, super-implicate order, also referred to as the noumenal sphere, whilst this is interpreted as Saguna Brahman, the unfolded, explicate order, otherwise known as the phenomenal sphere. A rather less popular interpretation is as follows: that refers to the all-pervading supersoul, whilst this refers to the individual self, soul. Previously, it was suggested that our universe is limited in size. Those who believe that the universe is infinite in size need to explain how the initial singularity, which was obviously limited in size *, created an unlimited area of space. Surely, an object that is infinite in size must have been perpetually infinite. The term size implies a measurable physical area of space, or a measurement of mass, whereas infinity cannot be measured. This conundrum is unanswerable on the ontological level, since one would need to live forever in order to measure the supposedly infinite universe. Philosophically, no temporal object, including time itself, can be eternal and/or infinite. Ultimate reality, the absolute, alone is infinite and timeless. Read chapter 03 to learn the distinction between these two spheres, i.e., the relative truth and the absolute truth. Notwithstanding the fact that, at the point in time in which the initial singularity was extant, it comprised the entirety of the then universe. The ontology of time. One of the most misunderstood aspects of this space-time universe is just that, space and time. There are various extant theories of time. However, time is a very simple concept to grasp for one who has experienced his or her own timeless nature. This usually occurs during a deep meditation practice, or during an awakening experience. See chapter 17 to understand the notion of spiritual awakening. Possibly the easiest way to understand time is to use the analogy of a movie. It may take a couple hours to watch a motion picture, yet the whole film is contained in the form of a single digital file, or in the case of older media, a reel of photographic film. The story of this universe may take hundreds of billions of Earth years to complete, but from the perspective of eternity, literally, no time, it is not as lengthy as even the blink of an eyelid. Indeed, it cannot be measured at all, for to measure a period of time requires a time-based metric. To use movie industry jargon, the story of this cosmos is already in the can, i.e., in the canister of film. This so-called block theory of time, otherwise known as eternalism, is often contrasted with philosophical presentism, in which the present moment alone exists. In practical terms, time is the perception of a succession of physical or mental events, that is to say, time corresponds to phenomenal change. So, to succinctly summarize the philosophy of time, from the viewpoint of the absolute, all time is contained within a pinpoint of eternity, yet from the perspective of conscious agents, there are no wholly past or merely future entities whatsoever. Read chapters 08 and 11 to learn of causality and predestination. Cf. Time. In the glossary. The 8 elemental groups. This phenomenal, material manifestation is composed of space, time, or, to be more accurate, space-time, energy, and matter, the latter of which comprises 8 elemental groups, the 5 gross elements, Mahabhuta, in Sanskrit, which are perceivable by at least one of the 5 senses, and the 3 subtle elements, Tanmatra, or Atisksma Matra, in Sanskrit, which are symptomatic of localized consciousness. NB. Dark matter and black holes are not included in this system, as cosmological science has yet to determine their structural composition. The 5 gross material elements, or states of matter, and 3 subtle material elements are, from most palpable to most intangible. Solids, aka earth, bhumi, or thivi, in Sanskrit, are made of densely packed molecules, and is of a steady shape at room temperature. Liquids, aka water, jala, or apa, in Sanskrit, are composed of moderately dense molecules, conforming to the shape of its environment or container, and in nature, often including at least some water molecules. Gases, aka air, vaya, or marut, in Sanskrit, consist of rarefied molecular particles, and is of no fixed, that is, persistent, shape. Heat, aka fire, anala, or tekis, in Sanskrit, is made of kinetic energy, which may appear visibly as fire, or at least heat waves. Ether, aka space, akasa, or calm, in Sanskrit, is a vacuum, consisting of 3-dimensional space, length, breadth, and width. However, recent investigation has confirmed that empty space is actually filled with virtual particles, matter and antimatter. Thus, the explanation for the material universe being created from nothing, antimatter, is plausible, according to quantum field theory. See nothing in the glossary. Mind, mana, in Sanskrit, is composed of sensual perceptions, instinctual thoughts, abstract images, including memories and fantasies, and emotions. Not all animal species have a mind, but function purely on base nervous reflexes, generated from their specific genetic sequence. In modern philosophy and in the field of neuroscience, the term qualia is often used to describe such mental images, thoughts, and feelings. Intellect, buddhi, in Sanskrit, consists of conceptual thoughts. Only the very higher species of animal life possess an intellectual capacity. Pseudo-ego, ahamkara, in Sanskrit, is comprised of the I, thought, specifically, the illusory, ephemeral self-identity. Only human beings possess the self-awareness necessary to question their own existence, and assume a sense of self. Read ch. 10 for a full disquisition of egoity. Each of the 5 perceptible material elements, or, to be more precise, the 5 elemental states, corresponds to one, or more, of the 5 bodily senses. E.g., in outer space, where there is a vacuum, ether, one can detect light with the eyes, yet space is not tactile, and cannot be smelled or tasted, nor can sound waves travel via space, so cannot be heard. At the opposite extreme, solid matter can be seen with the eyes, felt with the sense of touch, tasted with the tongue, smelt with the nose, and heard with the ear, when the solid matter is physically vibrated. Similarly, according to Vedic ontology, the three subtle material elements, or, to be more precise, the three subsets of consciousness, corresponds to one, or more, of the three states of being. E.g., in the waking state, Jagrata, in Sanskrit, all three elements are present: the causal body, Karana Sarira, in Sanskrit, the subtle body, Suksma Sarira, in Sanskrit, and the gross body, Stula Sarira, in Sanskrit. In the dreaming state, Svapna, in Sanskrit, two elements are extant, the causal and subtle bodies, whilst in deep sleep, Susupti, in Sanskrit, only one element is present, the causal body. The causal body is also known as the sheath made of bliss, Anandamaya Kausa, in Sanskrit. The three divisions of discrete consciousness. Because the three terms, mind, intellect, and consciousness, are almost always confused and/or conflated in both popular discourse and in the academic field of philosophy of mind, and even in Bharata too, despite easy access of Indians to the wisdom of the Vedantic schools of philosophy and theology, it will be prudent to expand on the definitions of these words, here and below. It shall prove extremely helpful for the reader to carefully study the glossary entries: consciousness, consciousness, object, subject, and sentience, before reading further. Consciousness in the human being is composed of the following three subsections, or divisions: mind, intellect, and pseudo-ego, or false ego. As mentioned above, the three subsections are not gross, tangible objects that can be perceived by the senses of the body. However, because they are, by definition, objects, they are called intangible, subtle objects, that is, objects that can be perceived solely by an observant subject. The three subsets of consciousness transpire from certain areas of the brain, a phenomenon known as strong emergence, yet, as stated above, are not themselves composed of gross matter. Cf. matter, gross, and matter, subtle. So, it is impossible to see, hear, smell, taste, or touch a mind, an intellect, or an ego. The three subsets of consciousness are the containers, or the receptacles, that hold thought objects. The mind contains fleeting sensual perceptions, the intellect holds conceptual notions, whilst the pseudo-ego consists of the sense of self. For example, I am a very wealthy woman, I am the greatest boxer in the world, or I am a spiritual being, living in a temporary material body. And in case one is wondering about this last example, yes, that too is an instance of false egoity, because it is an illusory, unfalsifiable belief. At the risk of confusing the reader, the three subsections of consciousness are, individually, also subjects when they are employed in the perception of other objects. See the glossary entry, nothing. Thus, there is a hierarchy of subjectivity in discrete human consciousness. It is not implied that mind is the sum of the actual thoughts, the sensations, the memories, and the abstract images that inhabit the mental element, or the space that those phenomena occupy, but the faculty itself. This mental space has two phases: the potential state, traditionally referred to as the unconscious mind, where there are no mental objects present, such as in deep sleep or during profound meditation, and the actualized state, usually referred to as the conscious mind, where the aforementioned abstract objects occupy one's cognition, such as feelings of pain. This topic is probably the least understood topic in the domains of psychology, philosophy, and spirituality. To summarize, the simplest life forms possess a certain degree of sentience, as do all species of plants and animals, of course. In the animal kingdom, the species that are evolutionarily lowest, including all insects, all arthropods, and most all mollusks, are sentient, but do not possess a mind as such. At some point, possibly in crustaceans or in fish, a mind develops in correspondence with brain complexity. Higher vertebrates, octopods, notwithstanding, gradually develop an intellect, that is to say, at some point in their evolutionary process, certain species develop a simple conceptual faculty, in accordance with greater brain capacity and complexity. We humans, as far as we know, are the only species on planet Earth that has developed that part of the brain that has acquired a sense of self, or to be more accurate, the false sense of self, known as ego, in everyday vernacular, but more appositely called pseudo-ego. Even in humans themselves, the faculty of pseudo-ego itself does not emerge until a couple of years after birth, in some cases, not at all in those individuals who are afflicted with severe mental disabilities. So, there are species of metazoans, and also individuals within animal species, that lie on a borderline between two of the three subsections of consciousness, such as the example just provided, where an infant human being may be on the cusp of acquiring a sense of self over a short period of time. This is a natural corollary of the evolutionary process, and something biologists will one day understand far more completely. Furthermore, there is much confusion, to put it extremely mildly, in both Western philosophy and in the so-called Eastern philosophical traditions, between the faculty of mind, mana, in Sanskrit, and the intellect, buddhi, in Sanskrit. Therefore, the following example of the distinction between mind and intellect ought to help one to understand the difference between the two subtle material elements. When one observes a movie or television show on the screen of an electronic device that one is holding in one's hands, one is cognizing auditory, textural, and visual percepts, originating from external objects, which penetrate the senses of the body, just as is the case with any other mammal. This is the component of consciousness known as mind, at least according to the philosophical terminology of this treatise, which is founded on Advaita Vedanta, according to widely accepted English translations of the Sanskrit terms. However, due to our intelligence, it is possible for we humans, and possibly a couple of other species of mammals, although to a far less sophisticated degree, to construct conceptual thoughts on top of the purely sensory percepts. E.g., hey, look at that silly guy playing in the swimming pool. Or, I wonder what will happen in the following episode. Or, I hate that the murderer has escaped from his prison cell. In order to provide a more organic illustration of how the faculty of mind melds, or blends, into the faculty of the intellect, consider the following example. When the feeling of hunger, or more accurately, appetite, appears in one's consciousness, that feeling is in the mind, since appetite is caused by hunger pangs in the digestive tract being transmitted to a primitive part of the brain, the hypothalamus. When we have the thought, I am hungry, that is a conceptual idea, which is a manifestation of intellect. NB. Because there is a fuzzy border between the mind and the intellect, both in brain function, and thereby, in its emergent cognitive manifestations, the term blends was employed above. The reason why you may not have heard of these ideas previously is probably due to the fact that Western cognitive science has yet to catch up with the ancient Indian systems of metaphysics known as Vedanta and Samkhya, in which mind is considered the sixth sense, although the five so-called external senses are, nonetheless, nominally distinguished from the mind, which is called an internal sense. This seems to be quite logical, because, just as the five outer senses involve a triad of experience, the perceived, the perception, and the perceiver, so too does mind, in the broadest sense of the term, comprise a triad of cognition, the known, the knowing, and the knower. Cf. Mind, in Glossary. Philosophy of Mind. There is much confusion, even in the so-called philosophical community, at least outside of India, Bharata, regarding the ontology of mind. As clearly stated in a previous paragraph, mind is inhabited by thought objects, that is, something experienced via one or more of the five bodily senses, or else, something arising from the imagination. So, for example, the mental image of a cat is a thought object, the subject being the observer of that thought object, which is the intellect. The detection of the scent of a flower is another thought object. The sound of a trumpet is also a thought object. Obviously, thoughts correspond to brain states. Accordingly, the brain itself is an object composed of nerve cells and blood vessels, etc., but it cannot be claimed that the brain is equivalent to mind. This is not how the word mind is normally used, neither in vulgar vocabulary, nor within scientific or philosophical lexes. On the other hand, there is some plausibility to the idea that consciousness itself, as opposed to discrete objects contained within the mind and intellect, is non-local. For example, the phenomenon of savant syndrome, out-of-body experiences, and the not uncommon instances of past life memories, suggests that psychic energy may not be attached to the brain of any particular person, and in this case, the word person may apply also to non-human animals. By psychic energy, it is meant the mental energy equivalent of gross matter energy that is added to the collective unconscious, in the same way that the energy of gross, tangible matter is not lost, according to the law of conservation of energy. This psychic energy may be an explanation for reincarnation. In case the reader is wondering why this subsection is included in this chapter, and not in the next chapter, since the next chapter is concerned with consciousness, it is because chapter 06 deals with universal consciousness, which is an entirely different category to the discrete, localized consciousness of many animal species of life. Truth be told, the only reason for the word consciousness being used in reference to ultimate reality is because that English word is very commonly used in the so-called ultra-spiritual community, even though it leads to a great deal of confusion, especially when members of the Neo-Advaita, non-dual spiritual community are in communication with outsiders. Transcending matter. Beyond the 8 material elemental groups, is the true self, which pervades the entire body, and indeed, which encompasses the entirety of existence, as the universal self, I am Atma Brahma, in Sanskrit. Ultimately speaking, the authentic self, Atmana, Paramatmana, in Sanskrit, alone, is. The following chapter deals more fully with the concept of pure infinite subjectivity, Brahman, or Purusa, in Sanskrit. However, assuming idealism is the correct metaphysical position, all 8 elemental groups are, in fact, composed of, or an appearance in, consciousness, since, as it was demonstrated previously, naught but consciousness exists. Consciousness is the ultimate reality, Prajnana Brahma, in Sanskrit. Just as a wedding ring is contingent on gold for its very existence, so too does the phenomenal universe depend entirely on beingness, or isness, consciousness, and sublime quietude. Yet, according to Advaita Vedanta, the material nature too is Brahman. It is said that the human brain is the single most complex object in the known universe. This may be correct, but when this fact is viewed from a broader perspective, it becomes rather imprecise, since the assertion that the brain is a discrete object is itself false, because it cannot be established precisely where is the boundary of this putatively separate object. Where exactly does the brain end and the spinal cord begin? The separation of the brain from the spinal cord renders the brain incomplete. In fact, the entire nervous system is one holistic system, which, if divided into discrete parts, renders the whole system severely lacking, or even totally redundant. This model can then be extended to other organs of the body in turn can be extended to its environment, etc., etc. The ultimate conclusion, therefore, is that there is no factual, ontic separation between any, seemingly, discrete object, and the entire spatio-temporal universe. All is one entangled system. This is a truism that nobody could possibly deny, now that we know that our universe was initially the approximate size of a mustard seed. Similar to the concept elucidated in the previous paragraph, that every seemingly discrete object in the known universe is incomplete, unless it is seen from the totality of phenomena, is the notion that any particular seemingly discrete action or motion is somehow related to every other action or motion in the phenomenal universe. So, for example, the fact that the Mughal emperor, Ala Azad Abul Muzaffar Shahab ud Din Muhammad Shah Jahan, built the Taj Mahal, not personally, of course, in Agra, Bharata, in precisely the manner in which it was constructed, is to an extremely minuscule degree, causally dependent on the farthest atoms in the uncharted universe. This may seem highly preposterous to the average person, but it can easily be demonstrated by a competent physicist, using deduction, as well as from a purely philosophical perspective. The fact that the mind can extend, in a sense, to the end of the universe, supports the hypothesis put forward in this paragraph. The finite human mind, or even the most highly evolved mind conceivable, since there may be more advanced species of life in other parts of the universe, multiverse, can never hope to understand the absolute, yet, via the practice of yoga, authentic religion, the mind and intellect can experience the absolute, for that is its very nature. How unfortunate are those philosophers and religious seekers who spend most all of their lives trying to understand ultimate reality on an intellectual level, ignorant of the fact that they are, in essence, that which they seek. Although the absolute cannot be verbally described, otherwise, it would be an object, as a concession to materialists, who often demand concrete answers from religionists. Ultimate reality is said to exhibit three innate attributes, known as Sachidananda, a compounded Sanskrit epithet, consisting of the three words, Sat, Sit, and Ananda, eternal being-ness, existence, or truth. Pure consciousness, or perfect knowledge. And unalloyed peace, often translated as bliss. However, the term bliss connotes an ephemeral experience of euphoria, whereas peace implies a steady state, absent of any temporal perturbation. This Trinitarian concept of ultimate reality adheres to the principles of divine simplicity and Occam's razor, especially if consciousness and peace are somehow reducible to pure being alone. Because absolutely nothing, Parabrahman, in Sanskrit, is infinite creative potentiality, it actualizes as absolutely everything, Brahman, or Purusa, in Sanskrit. Attributeless consciousness at rest, in Sanskrit, Nirguna Brahman, manifests as this material universe, consciousness in action, or, in Sanskrit, Saguna Brahman. In the lexicon of quantum physics, the enfolded, hidden, super-implicate order, appears as the unfolded explicate order. In the binary language of digital computation, 0 can be thought of as attributeless Brahman, whilst the number 1 as qualitative Brahman. In Western philosophical, specifically Kantian, terms, the noumenal world appears as the phenomenal world. In reality, there is no separation of anything at any time, assuming that pure subjectivity is a thing, and that time is a property of the Tao. The phenomenal manifestation is perpetually cyclical, because coming into existence implies going out of existence, just as cold implies the existence of heat, or as rich implies the notion of poor. Is it possible to have something without nothing? Obviously not, because the two go together, as interrelated polarities. There cannot be heat without cold, nor tallness without shortness, nor youth without old age. Similarly, despite what most believe, the outer world is as much the self as the inner world. Where is the boundary of the human body? When we look at a person, we cannot see that person unless we also see the background image. The two are inseparable, just as a flower and a bee cannot exist without the other. This fact alone is ample evidence that the universe is a holistic and holistic system, or entity, and possibly holographic in construction. The objective universe is merely a projection of the self, pure consciousness, in the same way that the image of a clay pot in a mirror is a reflection of the actual pot. The reflected image may superficially seem like a pot, but it is unable to hold water, and therefore is illusory, maya, in Sanskrit. Any reflected object has no existence without the existence of the subject, Brahman, in Sanskrit. You, who are reading these words, are in essence, that totality of existence, the highest universal principle, the essential irreducible self. In common parlance, you are God, if you only knew it. Most of the greatest sages in history have spoken about either or both these concepts, of the absolute truth being either absolutely everything or absolute nothingness, such as the concept of form is emptiness and emptiness is form, in Buddhism, or in the book, The Everything and the Nothing, by the Parsi sage Merwan Shariah Irani, aka Avatar Meher Baba, which is highly recommended, particularly chapters 51 to 56, which poetically describe the ineffable one without a second. Even an ordinary writer, American author Kurt Vonnegut, once penned, "Everything is nothing," with a twist. The Stanford Institute for Theoretical Physics professor, Dr. Leonard Suskind's so-called, first law of physics, states that information is indestructible. This is akin to the law of conservation of energy in classical physics, and proves that, just as physical energy cannot be annihilated, but only transmuted, psychic energy is never lost. Read subsequent chapters of this final instruction sheet for humanity to learn how this law relates to the notion of reincarnation, as well as to miraculous phenomena such as savant syndrome. Distinguishing life from inorganic matter. The planet on which we are residing consists of animate, organic life, as well as inanimate, inorganic matter. The 6 stages of organic life are: 1. Conception, birth. 2. Growth, development. 3. Maintenance. 4. Reproduction. 5. Aging, deterioration. 6. Death. Hence, all life forms originate from a manner of reproduction, either cell division, seeds, spores, asexual, or sexual reproduction. The organism then grows to maturity, in our case, sexual maturity in the early teens. The mature state is maintained for a certain period of time before reproduction takes place, although this potential is not always actualized. The organism grows old and deteriorates before finally dying. Some persons mistakenly believe that it may be possible for humans to one day live forever, but that can never ever happen for 2 reasons. Because material objects are by nature impermanent, and because this impermanent universe will eventually end in a big crunch. British polymath Thomas Young's famous double-slit experiment suggests that matter exists purely as potentiality or as a possibility, until it is observed by a conscious being. This phenomenon, known as the wave-particle duality, is often discussed in advanced spiritual discourses, in order to give credence to metaphysical idealism. There are other aspects of the universe, such as the various philosophical approaches to the nature of ontological time, the accelerated expanding universe, holographic universe principle, the golden ratio as the fundamental constant of the natural world, quantum superposition, wave function, and quantum entanglement, as well as the possibility of life on other planets, the crop circle phenomenon, and the presence of the Fibonacci sequence in nature, which are beyond the scope of this document, and which do not directly relate to the most exigent thing in life, to find the unending peace and happiness for which we humans are ultimately yearning. Long ago man recognized that all perceptible matter comes from a primary substance, of a tenuity beyond conception and filling all space, the akasha or luminiferous ether, which is acted upon by the life-giving prana or creative force, calling into existence, in never-ending cycles, all things and phenomena. The primary substance, thrown into infinitesimal whirls of prodigious velocity, becomes gross matter. The force subsiding, the motion ceases and matter disappears, reverting to the primary substance. From Man's Greatest Achievement. Nikola Tesla, Serbian-American engineer and inventor. Who is the perceiver? Universal consciousness alone is the perceiver. The body is merely the mechanism, through which perceiving takes place and from which the ego is inferred, as the perceiver of other objects. Strictly speaking, there is neither the perceiver nor the perceived. There is only perceiving, as the objective expression of the subjective functioning, of the one universal consciousness. The whole cosmos is an implicit unity, expressed in explicit duality. The original interrelated opposites, are beingness and non-beingness. Being can only come out of non-being, precisely as sound only emanates from silence, and light from darkness. The imagined void of non-being, however, is not emptiness, but the very fullness of potential, out of which arises all that exists. You have considered yourself to be a separate self, only because of having regarded a solid object with a name, that is a body, as yourself. But in fact, the body itself is nothing, but an insignificant, vastly intricate complex of electrical wave patterns, a series of rhythmic functions, a throbbing field of energy and emptiness. What you actually are, then, is what everybody else is, sentience itself. Therefore, instead of being a puny self by way of an object, you are indeed everything. Ramesh S. Balsekar, Indian spiritual teacher. P.S. You will notice that there is much overlapping and intertwining of concepts between this chapter and the next chapter, since matter and spirit are essentially one, meaning that the 2 realms of mind and matter are, essentially, 2 sides of the same coin, so to speak.